Hi, everybody. I'm Molly Matty, Dr. Molly Matty, or as Jean calls me, Dr. DNA. And I'm here to talk about what it's like to be a scientist and what it's been like for me to become a scientist. So this is where I work at the Salk Institute. It's very beautiful, and there's just like a river of knowledge running through the campus and the Pacific Ocean with beautiful sunsets every day. I work over here. So before I got to the beautiful Salk Institute, I grew up in a tiny town in Port St. Joe, Florida. And when I say tiny, I mean tiny, like 3,000 people tiny, like 90 people in my graduating class tiny. And I had the opportunity to go to college at North Carolina State University, where I studied chemistry. Just to put things in perspective, I'm not going to tell you my age, you can do some math. I started college in 2008. I went to graduate school, so I got a PhD in genetics and genomics from a little town just west of where I went to college in Durham at Duke University. And while I was in graduate school, I had an opportunity to travel a lot. And this is like free travel. And by the way, if you go to graduate school for the sciences, you get paid. So if, money's tight like money was for me, you can go to graduate school and get paid to be a student. So while in graduate school, I got to travel for conferences all over the United States and even internationally. I got to work in England for about 3 months with some really cool people and even do a short stint in the Netherlands, also full paid. And now I'm a postdoc. I'm a postdoc at the Salk Institute, all the way over here. Y'all know where that is on a map. And I'm in a molecular neuroscience lab. So if you've been paying attention, you've heard that I studied chemistry, genetics and genomics, and neuroscience. Those are not the same field. Those are totally different things when you think about them. And it's kind of funny how we get really attached to like the name of the science that we do, but really it's how we think and what we do on a day-to-day basis that actually determines what kind of scientist we are. So generally, I'm a biologist. I'm kind of a microbiologist, kind of a geneticist, and kind of a neuroscientist. But I'm just a scientist. So how did I know that I actually wanted to be a scientist? Well, I grew up in a swamp, just like Shrek, the ogre. We'll come back to Shrek because Shrek is actually the name of my current boss. But I grew up in a swamp in rural Northwest Florida. And as a child, I explored the natural world with my family. So I've picked up some sargassum, and this is my first field experiment. Probably tried to stick it in my mouth right after this picture was taken, being pulled in a little red wagon around the beach. So I loved everything living around me. And sometimes I absolutely loved it. I would put my bugs in this little container that I collected with my little dip net and, find little bugs in the cypress swamps near where I lived. And sometimes I hated it. Sometimes I was like, these bugs are biting me. I'm hungry. Dad, why are you making me learn scientific names? Like, Mom, I don't want to look at that spider. So as you are growing up and doing things that you have to do and things you don't have to do, keep track of the moments that you really like and the moments that you don't really like. And those can help determine what you should do, what classes you should take, what things you should spend your time doing, the books you should read. Try to fill your day with faces you make like this rather than like this. And if that's science, great. And if it's not, great. So I also want to let you know that you don't have to go to school for forever to be a scientist. So all you have to do is get excited and explore something. Maybe it's some bugs in your backyard. So you think about it. Then you record what you see. There's more bugs on Mondays than Thursdays. And then maybe do some research, read, talk to people about it, about that unknown thing, like why could there be more bugs on Monday than on Thursday? And then you could do an experiment, right? Be like, I'm going to put out food on Monday and on Thursday and see if I get the same amount of bugs with your parents' permission. And see if maybe it's that the trash gets taken out on Mondays and not Thursdays. And then you can share and apply what you learned. You could tell your friends, you could tell your parents, like, hey, there's more bugs on Mondays. Maybe let's take out the trash on a different day. And you just keep repeating that over and over again. And that is basically being a scientist. So you don't even have to go to school to be a scientist. to be a scientist. You can just do it in your backyard. Jean does that all the time. So when I was a kid, I was kind of obsessed with all living things. This is an anole lizard. I would watch them in my backyard, and they would have these really intricate mating little traditions. The males have this little red flap that comes out, and they're like, hey, look at my red flap. And the females will like decide which red flap they like more. You know, I explore San Diego now. I'm new here, and I like to go tide pooling and look at these beautiful chitons, the living fossils. These guys haven't changed in millions of years. So looking at this little arthropod is like looking back in time. You know, just looking at the beauty around you and asking, why does this butterfly's wings look so different from other butterflies' wings? How do they get that really shiny color? It's actually because of really cool structural chemistry. And so if you find that you've become obsessed with the blue morpho butterfly, maybe you want to be a chemist and study structural chemistry, and you could design dresses that suddenly have this shimmering effect that you got obsessed with because of a beautiful butterfly. If you make that dress, let me know. I will wear it. You know, you might go to the aquarium and see some jellyfish and think, how do they know to stay together? How are they all together? Like, do they have brains? Do jellyfish have brains? Are they communicating with each other? Are they secreting something like a signal, like a chemical to say, hey, I'm a jellyfish, I'm near you, let's stay together? Maybe, I don't know, look it up. And then, you know, we can also use our interests to inspire how to change the world, you know, how to conserve the land that we're on, to prevent global climate change, to make the world a safer, cleaner place. And so I put the longleaf pine here because it's so critical to the ecosystems that I'm from, and they get cut down a lot. So, you know, for me, it's living things that really excite me. For you, it might be the structure of a bridge. So just think about those things that make you smile and make you wonder more, and just keep doing this cycle. And that's how you can be a scientist. I'm generally just a biologist. You don't have to put a more specific name on me, and it's the study of living things. So as a kid, and even now, I'm obsessed with all these really cool living things. But in the lab that I work in at the Salk Institute, I study one living thing right now, and that is a microscopic worm. And this microscopic worm is called C. elegans, Caenorhabditis elegans, and it's a nematode. Fun fact about nematodes, they're the most abundant animal on this earth. If we could be aware of all the animals on earth right now, 4 out of 5 of them would be a nematode. Crazy. Okay, so you're like, Molly, why, Dr. Molly, Dr. DNA, why are we talking about a worm right now? Like, you were just telling us about these really cool animals. Like, why do we care about worms? Well, these worms, like us and most other animals, can make decisions. So they have a brain, a bunch of neurons in their head, and it helps them decide what they like and what they don't like, where to go, where to move, maybe who to mate with. They eat just like you and me. They eat, they've got a mouth, they slurp up some bacteria, they grind it up, and they digest it through this long tube of an intestine, just like me and you. They also poop. Everybody poops. We know that. And they poop out of their butt, just like you and me. And they can have babies. So these worms are hermaphrodites, which means they have both male and female parts, and they are capable of self-fertilizing. So these hermaphrodites just keep making essentially clones of themselves over and over again. They can make about 200 clones of themselves. And they grow old. Every single tissue in their body deteriorates as they get older, just like you and me. So they start making worse decisions, their muscles kind of start to deteriorate, their intestines get leaky, they don't poop as regularly as they used to, just like an old person. What's really cool though is all of this is in 1 millimeter. So a millimeter is if you take your fingers and put them together and then try to get them to be just not touching, and that's about a millimeter. So I have to use a microscope to look at these guys. And the thing that I'm really interested in using these worms to model, or to kind of let me understand something bigger, is decision making. So these worms, like I said, can make decisions. So I'm going to let you all make a decision. You and some of your pals, once vaccinated and safe, are at the mall, and you want to go to the food court. There's some coffee, some tacos, some ice cream, pick your favorite thing. Maybe it's hot chocolate. Some of y'all would go to get those things, maybe tacos and ice cream. But if there were a barrier of some sort with something terrible, like a pit of snakes or a swarm of bees or a pit of sharks, maybe some dinosaurs, you wouldn't probably cross that barrier, right? Far fewer of you and your pals would go across to get that thing you want. And you could probably list the reasons why. You might say, I'm allergic to bees. You might be like, I love snakes. I will cross that pit of snakes for anything because I love snakes. So it's really difficult to study this in people because all of you have had different experiences, you have different genetics, you are just very different. But in the worms, they have basically the same DNA because they're clones of their mothers. We can control everything in the lab, their food, their environment, everything. And so we can ask in a very easy to understand and not a lot of like, well, what about, do they like snakes? We can ask what controls risky behaviors? What controls risk taking with worms? So what we do is these worms really love the smell of buttery popcorn. Like, you walk into a movie theater, someday we'll be able to walk into movie theaters again, and you smell that buttery popcorn smell. It's actually a chemical called diacetyl, and a lot of bacteria produce this chemical. And these worms eat bacteria, so they love the smell of buttery popcorn. They hate copper. Copper's like their swarm of bees. They do not like it. It's bad for them. And so we can put down a whole bunch of worms onto a little plate in the lab and watch them as they move across. Do they go to that buttery popcorn smell? Do they stop? Do they go backwards? What do they do? And so what we can do is put down about 100 worms and track them. So each one of these little lines is a worm's footprints, essentially. They don't have feet, so they're just their little tracks. And you can see that most of them hang out over here. There's a few brave ones that go toward that copper barrier to get to that diacetyl, that buttery popcorn chemical. And maybe 10 worms will make it over here. So if we starve the worms, if we deprive them of food for 3 hours, they eat constantly. So 3 hours without food is actually a lot for these worms. So many more of them will cross that copper barrier, that scary toxic place to get to that popcorn smell. So now about 80 worms have come. And this is really important for all of us to think about because what is going on inside your body affects your decisions. So these things going on inside your body could be, your genetics and your prior experiences. They could be your hormones. They could be the stressors in your life. So if you've ever seen a classmate act out in class, maybe do something that you would consider risky, think of to yourself what's going on inside their body that could make them do this. And, it might be that they got yelled at that morning. Maybe they got stung by a bee on the playground. And there are these experiences, these internal states that affect the decisions we make and how we interact with the world. So we can think about that through worms. And so from this, we've learned that hungry worms are more willing to take risks. And you can think about yourself, if you were hungry, maybe you'd cross that swarm of bees to get to a taco. And hungry worms behave more dangerously. They're putting themselves at risk because they're stressed and they really want to get to that thing that they like. And so with these worms, we can try to figure out why this is happening, how this is happening, and kind of relate it to other animals, maybe including people. So yeah. Also, can have a few pictures, Jean, if you want to see, that lately, this past year, since the last time I talked to y'all at the Sci Expo, I've been able to work from home and safely go to work almost every day. I'm very fortunate. I have a little home lab with a microscope in my bedroom where I can look at those little plates of worms and count how many have decided to go to that buttery popcorn smell. I do things like this where I talk to students either in college or high school or middle school or elementary school, or I actually talked to a retirement community earlier on in the pandemic about this work. They were very interested in the old worms and how they were doing. And I also have been able to train new people in the lab. We've been able to put on our masks and stay 6 feet apart and learn cool new science together. And if you're a scientist, you get to do more than just look at worms under a microscope. You get to share your science with other people. That's one of those little circles in that cycle of science, right? Is to share what you've learned. So I get to work with young students and their families at public science events. I get to talk to high school students in my own lab. So this is actually where I work every day in the lab. And just like today, talk to people all across the globe about the work that I do. I also love science because I get to meet cool people and get to talk about what's going on and how does that work. And then we can design experiments to find out. So right now I'm trying to figure out how worms know when they're hungry. And we think it has something to do with this funny little blinking light that's going on inside these worms. So this is a worm as it gets progressively hungrier. And so there's something in their intestines that's there, goes away, and then comes back. I don't know what it is. I need to find out. I'm also really interested in how this thing called the gut microbiome, which you've maybe heard of, it can make you sick, it can make you better. I'm interested in how that gut microbiome can affect animal behavior. So if we give them a different microbiome, are these worms gonna behave more riskily, or are they gonna act more normal? And I used to work on the immune system, and that's something we're all becoming a lot more familiar with these days. So I used to try to find out how we can make our immune system stronger. And I used to use little baby fish to do that. And again, you don't have to just sit in the lab and stare at glowing worms all day. You can also make new friends and travel the world. So I worked with an awesome group of people in the UK, made some wonderful friends. We're all wearing our PPE, which we've become familiar with the word PPE. I feel like I can say it now and people know that it means personal protective equipment, you know, lab coats and gloves. And it's just kind of funny that that's a term we all know now. Get to go to conferences and hang out with new people at the beach and tweet about all of our cool new science and cool new friends. And I've given a presentation just like this one to like 1,000 people, like 1,000 scientists in this lecture hall. Like it was like an opera hall. Super cool, fun time talking about science, meeting new people and traveling the world. I also want to share that, you know, you might learn in school that so-and-so discovered something. It's never just one person. It's never just one person. When I'm showing you the work that I do with my worms, I'm in a lab full of people, full of really cool, interesting, diverse people with new ways of thinking and unique skill sets. So we have a boss. His name's Shrek, like the ogre. So full circle. I'm from the swamp, and now I work with Shrek. We have a team of people who work on what I just talked about. We have people who study predator-prey relationships. So like if you're thinking about, you know, how are animals afraid or how are animals aggressive, you can do that with worms. So cool. We have people who use really big computer programs to figure out how brain cells are talking to each other. So if you like coding and video games, you can be a scientist and use those skills to understand how the brain works. And we have people who are trying to control brains with sound. So if you're a big sci-fi nerd like me and you're thinking about Dune with the weirding module, like you can control brains with sound. And that's what a few people in the lab are working on. Or you could just learn how to speak whale. That's another thing that I think they should try to do. So if you have questions, I will be around on May 1st, and you can ask me anything from why is your lab so messy to how did you make a two-headed zebrafish to anything I talked about. So yeah, love to talk to y'all about your scientific thoughts.
That was amazing. That was mind blowing. I just literally learned so much. I'm with worms a lot. You know, I'm outside in my garden. I'm about the worm. Like I'm about the worm, right? Stay curious and
keep on sciencing.